Ji, Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope I am clear and I am audible in the audience downstairs. I
I,
right,
I,
right,
I,
right, right. There's actually some echo. If I can come downstairs, if that helps, I can just sit in the audience and moderate the session. But uh, I guess there are certain technical problems that we are having. So Ali, are we good to go? All right. So thank you very much, everyone. I hope you're fine now. My name is Kareem, and I'm heading Co-Grow at CoLabs. Co-Grow aims to help startups in their journey, be it raising funds, getting exposure, or any other needs. Today, I'm honored to have been joined by an amazing panel, a star-studded panel, I would say. We have Nighat Dad. They've already been introduced. Just to give a very quick introduction, we have Nighat Dad. She is a digital rights activist and executive director of Digital Rights Foundation. Faisal Aftab, who is managing partner of Zayn Capital. Most of us, we know him for his previous role at Laxon Investments. And Sulmaan Hanif, who's chief revenue officer at Fassets Exchange, based in UAE. He has worked with Gartner and other organizations in the past. So coming to the topic, the debate is centralization or decentralization, and that is what we referred to earlier as well. This debate has popped up again in the last decade with blockchain and all of the technologies. So we are here to discuss the same. Centralization is status quo. Just to give a quick heads up, it's a status quo. It is prevalent in all over. It's not just in Pakistan. It's a global phenomenon right now. And changing status quo, that is always always something which requires a lot of effort from everyone. But it has led to a lot of data breaches as well. If we talk about Pakistani context, we have got a few examples that we have been hearing in last few years. For example, in 2018, Kareem announced that 14 million users of Pakistan and MENA region, their data has been compromised in a security breach. Interestingly, in 2018, I'm not sure if many of you have heard about this, but the head of FIA cybercrime investigation, they revealed that most of the banks in Pakistan, their user accounts, almost all the banks in Pakistan, their user accounts have been compromised. And likewise, last year, there was this news again on mainstream media that the data of 115 million subscribers from Pakistani telecom industry that was put on sale on dark web for 300 bitcoins. If you are hearing this conversation, statistically 50% of us, because since that is 50% of Pakistan's population, half of our data that might have been compromised as well, including our panelists too, including myself. So that is something that is where we are. And there are several examples. So I start the conversation with just extending the same. Let's talk about this problem, because we cannot ignore this problem. Although we hear these news time and again, and then we forget this news, and then life moves on. So Nighat, starting with you, how big is this problem? Is it worse than what we know publicly? Or is it like, are we scaling down the problem? So can we just first talk about the problem?
Yeah. No, thank you so much. I think it's very important conversation that we are having today, and specifically, not just like celebrating, the concept of blockchain and how we can have, more initiatives around this in Pakistan. So it's a good conversation, but I think at the same time, it's very important for us to get an idea where we stand when it comes to the legal framework around data privacy, or just the basic framework of like cybercrime. And I don't know, like in audience or our panelists, if they know that Pakistan basically enacted a cybercrime law, which is called Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act, back in 2016. And since then, what we have seen in that particular act is mostly, you know, the crimes that are anyone can you know, do on internet in Pakistan are criminalized. For the very first time, such a sophisticated, and I would say as a digital rights activist, a problematic law was introduced in Pakistan. There were in the past cybercrime ordinance, etc. But I would say, you know, the lack of knowledge, the lack of understanding within the law enforcement, within even the legislature and the judiciary, you know, we didn't go anywhere, you know, when it comes to cybercrimes law. So there was a huge debate for a couple of years in previous government, and lots of people sort of like participated in that debate. And we as rights activists sort of informed the then government, that it's not really like a good law, because you cannot criminalize everything online while the internet users or the industry you know, like don't even have any idea what constitutes cybercrime, right? So this is like the kind of basic legal framework we have in Pakistan. In last 4 years, what we have seen, you have mentioned FIA, Kaleem, and I would say that this is so FIA is the designated law enforcement authority. But what we have seen in last 4 or 5 years since the law is enacted doesn't really understand how to deal with this, you know, issue of not just you know, cybercrimes, but also data breaches. And the biggest problem in Pakistan, what we see when it comes to data breaches, is that there is absolutely no legal framework to protect data of citizens, to protect data, you know, when it comes to public bodies, the data that they gather, for instance, NADRA, for instance, Safe City, for instance, you know, there are like so many government bodies who are collecting data of millions of citizens every day. We have seen this sort of increased drastically during COVID. In absence of any legal framework, the conversation around data protection law has been going on for a decade now. And last year, the government also sort of finalized a data protection bill, which I would say it's following the GDPR model. It's actually not bad. It's a good draft, keeping in mind, you know, like the Pakistani context and, you know, like how much work we have sort of done when it comes to data protection, etc. And but I guess there is lack of political will. So what we are seeing is, I don't know how many of you have heard about the social media rules, which are the government is trying to enact under Prevention of Electronic Crimes Act, in which, you know, they are trying to regulate internet, not just in Pakistan, but also, you know, trying to regulate big tech giants. And the provisions are really problematic and draconian, I would say. So there is like this tendency of enacting such laws, but we have been pushing and asking the IT ministry, where do we stand when it comes to data protection bill? Because last we consulted was in October 2020. And we gave all our recommendations and feedback that how it should look like. How many of you in the tech industry have been consulted by the government, right? So, you know, like the law is there. It looks, it's a good draft if, you know, they sort of now push it further and, you know, present it in the parliament, but it's not going anywhere. It's been almost a year. So, you know, when it comes to data protection regulatory framework, that's where we stand. I would say not just the government's body, like, of course, I'm worried about my data going in the NADRA, right? And, you know, like it's a biometric, it's the largest, biggest biometric database in the world. I don't know, like, who has access to that data, right? And people who illegally have access to my data and sort of, you know, like selling that data or whatever they are doing with that, I have no legal recourse. I have no legal remedy. So, you know, that's where we stand at the moment. But I would also say it's not just the public bodies, it's also, you know, the private bodies, the telecom companies, the tech giants, you know, like all these actors, and also, you know, like our entrepreneurs, like making applications. the way they are collecting data, where is the transparency and accountability? I think it will only come when we'll have a national regulatory framework, and where people would know that, okay, so one data breach will result into giving them fine or something. I'm not in favor of criminalizing such things, because like Pakistan as a country, I don't think that we understand even the concept of data protection or the right to privacy or the cybercrime. So I would just like end here for my first intervention, but that's where we stand when it comes to the regulatory framework of.
All right. So you gave us two very important words: accountability and transparency. And I mean, that should be the core of every society, because all of our data, if that is going in the hands of few people, then it is our right to know if that data is really secure as we are made to believe. So and let's talk about technology, because there have been certain technologies leading to centralization, to assist centralization. Then we have got cybersecurity, no doubt. Cybersecurity is one of the hottest fields right now, but is it good enough? Are there enough technologies that that can fuel up this this bridging the gap that we have right now? So Sulmaan, let me ask you this: for people who are new to blockchain, for people who don't know in detail what it is, can you just explain in simple terms what it is and how it can lead to more to better data privacy, to better, to addressing all of these concerns which Nighat has raised?
Yes, thank you very much. And first of all, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for having me. It's very nice to be speaking on this panel, and great to be taking part in this event with Stacks, a project that we're very fond of here at Fassets. So you asked a good question, and I think Ms. Nighat made some great points around the regulatory framework and the constraints. And I think one final comment I'd make just to her opening statement is that we see that regulation in most countries follows innovation, and I think innovation coming from, let's say, the private sector, wherever it may come from, it's incumbent on everybody who is coming up with something innovative to work hand in hand with the regulators, because more often than not, especially in the world of emerging technology, the regulators are actually playing catch up, and they're human beings just like all of us, and they're also trying to understand how best to regulate this new phenomenon. So you're talking about transparency, accountability, and I'm not a data security expert by any means, but I can share just a little bit about blockchain, I think is what you spoke about. So what is blockchain? Why is it important? Why are people talking about it? And I think before I talk about blockchain, I think people usually also hear blockchain and Bitcoin in the same sentence. So everyone knows, or everyone supposedly knows now, that obviously Bitcoin is this new asset class that nobody governs, nobody creates, nobody can control. But Bitcoin is also underlined by the actual powerful technology that drives it, which is the blockchain. So what is the blockchain? And before we ask about what is the blockchain, we should also understand what happens right now when it comes to movement of information or movement of value. Is if I want to pay you, Mr. Kaleem, any kind of money or transfer any kind of value, right now we have the role of a third party. So that third party, in this example of me transferring money from one person to another, would be a bank or a credit card processor or a payment processor. And effectively, that third party is just saying, Sulmaan has the money to give to Mr. Kaleem. And that third party is giving trust in us, and we are also giving trust in them. So when Bitcoin came around towards the end of the 2008 financial crash, in 2009, an anonymous programmer or group of programmers known as Satoshi Nakamoto brought forth to the world this digital currency, which they said could not be reversed, could not be broken, and effectively solves a really big problem around what we've been talking about, which is centralization. Now, why is centralization typically looked at as bad? Is because centralization drives, it's promoting abuse of trust sometimes. So what Bitcoin or blockchain was solving to try and solve is this whole issue around trusting, and also around how trust can be abused. So what is the blockchain? Let's say, for example, traditionally a ledger or a book is used in a bank, whereby it will note down who owes somebody, person A, person B. Now that book is obviously open to manipulation, but what the blockchain does is effectively, imagine Google Sheets that maybe everybody is used to using, or versus an Excel spreadsheet. An Excel spreadsheet, everybody would have their own version on their own laptop. I would put something else in my spreadsheet, so-and-so would put something on their spreadsheet. But what does the blockchain allow is that everybody is working off of one single source of truth. And therefore, being in a completely decentralized nature means that no one single entity or one single body or actor has control over that data. Now, that's really important in this conversation because whilst the third party in traditional senses takes maybe certain types of fees, let's say the credit card company in that example I was giving, or maybe taking further time in approving the transaction, what happens with the blockchain is that everybody who's part of that network is therefore able to see all the transactions on this distributed ledger. And why is that so important, especially in the context of what we're speaking about, is the distributed ledger actually gives an increase in decentralization, which is therefore promoting actually increasing trust in a system which is actually built of mistrust. And I think that's the first thing that we should all kind of remember, that the decentralized nature and philosophy of blockchain is inherently bringing that trust in a very untrusting ecosystem that we find ourselves. And it's not limited to Pakistan. This is across the world. We've seen massive abuses of trust in all walks of life. And this technology is hopefully, inshallah, going to help people to gain better transparency and better understanding of how information is moving across borders even.
All right. So to sum it up, it is distributed ledger. It is peer-to-peer network. It is, let's say, smart contracts and not just contracts. It is it is all the decentralization that we've been talking about. So Faisal, I would like to know your thoughts on this. You have been you have been a keen follower of Bitcoin, of Ethereum, and other projects. What are your thoughts? And let me ask you this: can you share some applications of blockchain where you think it can really help with data privacy?
Sure. Thank you. First of all, my apologies for joining late. It's 3 a.m. in New York, so the timing didn't work out, but I'm still happy to be here. From an application point of view, especially on data privacy, I think, as the other panelists were mentioning as well, the way I look at blockchain is effectively the structure of the internet as effectively changing in the back end, right? So if we look at how the internet has operated and developed since its inception, is this essentially the changes have been front-facing user interface, where you've had basically, let's say, desktop-based views, or then it shifted into mobile applications from a consumer point of view. But the backend remained very centralized. So when you look at data as of today on the internet, it's in a centralized format where effectively it's on a server and there's a firewall that's protecting it, very similar to a house, right? Where you have a house with valuables and you build a wall, and a security guard is effectively defending the valuables inside. So one of the applications of blockchain is effectively the consensus algorithm that allows you to effectively take data and encrypt the very nature of data and then split it amongst multiple devices. So instead of protecting it centralized, you can now distribute it to, let's say, 1 million devices, and then you need effectively 51% of validation in order to make changes to that data. And so as we've seen worldwide, especially on the banking side and financial services, there have been lots of hacks and leaks. Even Facebook, for that matter. In fact, I have an application that will tell me on a regular basis, a subscription, how many of my passwords have been compromised, and pretty much every password that I've had has been compromised, and I've had to go and update it because these leaks are becoming more and more prevalent. So when you look at it from the structure of the back end of the internet changing, I think blockchain as a whole with the consensus algorithm will change the very nature of how data is looked at or is accessible by third-party individuals. I think it also empowers individuals. I've seen applications that individuals are working on which are non-cryptocurrency related, where today my data is put on the internet, let's say, or any user's data, and it is not in our control because it's on third-party websites. So in the future, one of the potential use cases is that all of your data on the web effectively can be in your control. And when I'm talking about data, I'm talking about very sensitive personal data, like your name, date of birth. I mean, some of these things will be publicly available, but even going down to, let's say, your financial data, your health data, which is becoming more and more prevalent, where we're required to now share it with government institutions or IATA, requires us shared with different airport agencies before we land. So all these things will be effectively given control to the user, and then the user can effectively release this data on a permission basis. So these are some of the applications that I can see in blockchain. But I've said this many times. My fundamental use case of blockchain as of today is the exchange of value component, because that is the first layer of application. I mean, everything else that we do on the blockchain, until the connectivity improves, let's say in 5G, and the infrastructure improves, you're looking at just a slower database versus the database available today. So exchange of value to me is the most important component in order for this ecosystem to continue to grow.
All right. So exchange of value, and it is the user. You're saying that who should be the ultimate owner of their data, and if it has to be monetized, they should have, it should have been with their permission or even with their percentage in that monetization. So as a user, it is my right for my data to be decided not by anyone else, but it is me. Nighat, we have been talking about this. We saw there are data breaches. We see that there are a lot of applications. There's now global adoption as well to start addressing these data privacy issues. But you must have been talking to some of our legislators, some of the people who have been trying to do this in Pakistan. Where do you see, where are we missing the collective efforts? Is it just not the understanding? Are we just having not enough skilled manpower to do this for us? Because our audience, they are some of the people who can bridge in that gap. They can bring in their peers. So where are you seeing the problem areas and opportunity areas for our audience who are, let's say, blockchain experts who are going to be expert in all these sorts of areas we're talking about?
Yeah. So yeah, Kaleem, we have been speaking to different parliamentary committees, IT committee in the Senate, IT committee in the National Assembly, and also IT ministry. Sadly and unfortunately, the people in the power, especially dealing with the tech industry, have not enough understanding of the decisions that are being taken, the laws that are being enacted or being drafted, and also the lack of engagement with the relevant actors. There is hardly any multi-stakeholder approach. Like one day we wake up and we see, oh, there is this social media rules draft floating on the internet, and then there are multiple drafts and you have no idea what exactly is happening. So people, the relevant people, and I would say young people, who are the change makers, who are bringing new ideas, innovative ideas, and also initiatives in the country, I don't think that they are being consulted or they are even part of these conversations, especially in the power corridors. So I definitely believe that it's also lack of understanding of the people, the old guard sitting in the power corridors. But also I think it's also important for government and those who understand the new technologies and making all these rules, regulations, and deciding things on their own. They really need to see that do they really want to leverage blockchain, right? It's not just a technology question, it's a decision that can transform business models and processes and reshape the set of stakeholders and their roles. So any emerging concept with significant potential benefits, blockchain is not a silver bullet. It is not applicable to every situation, and users and developers are still sorting out challenges, both technological and managerial. And on the technology side, there are questions, for the questions of platform, scalability, validation methods, data standardization, and system integration. So on the managerial side, the questions include business model transformation, incentive structure, transaction scale, and maturity. But I guess the most fundamental question for the government leaders may be this: do they want to be positioned to capture the benefits of the new potentially transformative technology that is blockchain? And I think while asking this question to our government, do they actually understand what is going on in the world? Do they understand what the basic concept of blockchain is, what this technology is, and how it can transform us or the public sector? So yeah, I mean, I don't think that there is an approach of multi-stakeholderism. The framework which we from the socio-economic value of blockchain, adoption at the ecosystem level from a multi-stakeholder perspective, organizations and industries and users and society, public sector and startups and entrepreneurs.
All right, that is interesting. And so Sulmaan, you said that before. So I mean, the governments are slow. They generally play the catch-up game. Regulators are slow, but we have got startups in societies who are proactive, who just try to address the problems before everyone knows it. So I mean, we talked about certain problems in these organizations, Kareem and telcos and other organizations. Every global breach of data on average, it costs $3.6 billion, or let's say 6 billion rupees in our currency. And we have got some brains, some smart brains sitting in front of us who are going to be blockchain experts. So what do you think these organizations could have done right to avoid these data breaches, to avoid these problems?
Yeah, and I think Ms. Nighat said it best, that blockchain isn't a silver bullet that by putting something in a black box, all of a sudden everyone's data is going to be secure. I think the main things are twofold. I mean, without being a security expert and saying about what they should have done, I think the underlying notion of having reducing key person risk and having the governance policies in place to ensure that there's no one centralized source of all the information being on one server or all of the information being in the hands of just a few powerful people. This is the actual underlying ethos of blockchain and the decentralized nature of utilizing things such as a distributed ledger. So you were asking what they could do. I mean, first of all, stuff that doesn't even require a blockchain is obviously making sure that you have the right policies, procedures, and governance in place to ensure that these kind of things don't happen. That's a no-brainer. Sometimes easier said than done. Every company can sometimes fall victim to this, whereby a few people at the very top have all access to information. But secondly, I think also if we think about the similarities to blockchain, the underlying philosophy around blockchain is creating trust in a trustless kind of ecosystem or untrusting ecosystem, as I said. So currently the way things are done is that there is inherently a very untrusting nature of people when it comes to the traditional financial services industry, or maybe in advertising, how our information is maybe sold on and monetized. But I think utilizing a distributed nature or distributed kind of ledger technology in the future as its kind of enterprise applications become more and more accepting, this will be definitely a way in which that companies can start avoiding data breaches, because one single server that holds all the information is far easier to hack than it is for multiple devices or nodes or different computers across the world or servers across the world that will hold this kind of information. And if you see in terms of how, at the very core levels of how blockchain operates with regards to each transaction being recorded on the blockchain and each new hash being referencing from a previous hash, there are certain things I think Ms. Nighat mentioned around multi-stakeholders. Blockchain is also incorporating multiple signatories even to ensure that these kind of transactions are validated, or this kind of transfer of value is also validated and verified. So yeah, in a nutshell, I think there is definitely a role for enterprises to start exploring more decentralization as a way to avoid that concentration of power, to avoid that abuse of trust, or even avoid the ease of which hackers can access this data. And then one thing I think that Ms. Nighat also said, which I'd just like to chime in on, is around, I didn't necessarily say that governments are slow per se, but I think that everyone has a duty to kind of talk and a duty to kind of come to the table in a more pluralistic fashion to say, hey, we've come up with something really exciting. We want to do something beneficial for society. How can we now regulate it with maybe new regulations? Because sometimes traditional legislation or traditional regulation for a certain part of society might not be fit for purpose now. And I think that's something that we're seeing increasingly through the adoption of these kind of emerging technologies. And I'm sure you've been speaking about today in your event in that with Web 3.0 and this whole new evolution of how the internet will be governed and how data will be protected, this is obviously going to be part and parcel of that, having that conversation.
All right, so we will come to that in a bit. That what are most low-hanging fruits that that we can aim for in first iteration, because this is slow change, and I mean, like we said, centralization is status quo, and there has to be gradual change. There cannot be sweeping change, even if regulators want that change. There's a slow process. But Faisal, let me just complete this loop. Why, if this technology is so good, if blockchain is so good, and I was just reading somewhere, it was first proposed in 1991, the whole thing that it should be distributed and stuff, and then 2009, I mean, fast forward, when Bitcoin was introduced, only in the last decade we are seeing more of this technology. Still, the global adoption of this technology is slow. So if everything is so good, why we see a slow adoption? Why we think, why we have not seen a massive adoption of this technology so far?
Yes. So look, you have to look at blockchain as a technology as effectively, I mean, I would say in adoption, we're at 1997 of the stage of the internet adoption. And if you look at, let's say in terms of the adoption of technology, right? As I mentioned, I think every time a technology comes, it's usually solving a problem. Bitcoin, by its very nature, is solving the exchange of value problem. I think Sulmaan was mentioning similarly the trust in the middle, right? The middleman. It's also a macro level change happening in the world. The timing of this technology, where effectively we're at the 100-year cycle, macroeconomic cycle, where currencies are being questioned in terms of their purchasing power. And Bitcoin, which is the first application on a proof of work concept, is effectively acting as a store of value or digital gold. And really as an application from an online perspective, when you look at Bitcoin's adoption rate, the actual S curve is faster than any other technology that's come on this planet, if you just look at it from 2009. So I think roughly we have about, for all of cryptocurrency, the bulk of that obviously is Bitcoin in terms of the your overall market cap of cryptocurrency. You're looking at, I think, roughly about 120 million users or so worldwide that are using it as of today. It's projected to be roughly around 1 billion plus by 2024. So it's a massive, potential upside, massive pace of adoption, and this is going to keep leapfrogging as more and more fiat on ramps come on. When I talk about fiat on ramps, obviously let's take Pakistan for example, right? So there's no rupee to Bitcoin or cryptocurrency purchase capability available as of today. I think Facet is one of those entities that's working on that in the future. But in the US, where I'm located at the moment temporarily, it is very easy for me to purchase cryptocurrency, where platforms like Coinbase are integrated directly with my bank account or my credit card company, and I can just purchase it. So you're going to see the adoption of the technology improve as more and more connectivity with the traditional financial system is made possible through exchanges or third-party setups, and as well as payment processing capabilities. Right. And again, for me, as of today, I mean, there's multiple things people can work on blockchain, but I'm much more fixated on the exchange of value element, because I think that is the current problem that needs to be solved. And the analogy would be, if you look at your landline telephone phase versus cell phone phase in terms of the technology. I mean, if you landlines were analog, and then we went into digital cell phones, which changed the world effectively, essentially when smartphones were introduced, right? So look at our current financial monetary system and the settlement system as an analog system, which when I refer to that, I'm referring to the SWIFT system, I'm referring to the ACH system and the Fedwire system, and even the credit card settlement system. These are very analog systems, and but Bitcoin and things like it are effectively digital instantaneous settlement systems that are behaving almost like cash versus the analog settlement transactions, where it takes a wire transfer takes effectively 1 to 2 hours to settle. There's no logic associated with that. It should be instantaneously, because I can send an email and it's received, or WhatsApp a message someone is received instantaneously. I don't know why my money takes anywhere from 1 hour to 5 days at times, especially for international buyers, and that's slowing the velocity of money down globally. It's slowing the commerce down. It's actually slowing the adoption of the internet down, because money is holding back, especially from a cross-border exchange. So, to me, that's the core application of this of blockchain. And I think it is the fastest adoption in the history of the world. Smart contracts, a wall of smart contracts, in my opinion, is coming in the next 2 to 3 years, especially for those that are here from a development point of view and looking to get into this industry. I think the entire financial structure and all the financial contracts are going to be rewritten this decade in the form of smart contracts. Everything from your mortgage contracts that are already in place to your, even invoice contracts, they're all going to be rewritten in the smart contract format, either on top of Ethereum or on top of Bitcoin or iterations of it. So lots of innovation ahead.
All right, and that connects us very well with this last round of questions, and we should be wrapping up in next 5 minutes. So the question is and let me ask Sulmaan first, because Faisal already touched on that briefly. Faisal, I'll come back to this if you want to address the audience directly, because they are the people. So Sulmaan, the question is, what are the low-hanging fruits in this data privacy thing, in this blockchain thing that you would like to be hit first? Or let me flip this question: if you have to advise this audience on, let's say, on the blockchain ideas, on crypto startups ideas, let's say the ideas around the data privacy thing, what are few ideas that or suggestions that you give to this audience?
Sure. So I think we've spoken about quite a few different things. We spoke about data privacy. We spoke about applications of blockchain, and obviously with Bitcoin being the main first one, as Faisal mentioned. And obviously you asked about what advice I could give, if any, to the audience. I think first and foremost is education. I think let's first understand, what is this technology? What are its current applications? What are some of its perceived use cases in other parts of the world that you can bring back to Pakistan? As a Pakistani, I'm a big fan of bringing great ideas back to Pakistan. And I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. I think some of the amazing products, some of the amazing businesses around the world, as you've seen, have been replicated of another amazing idea they've seen elsewhere, but they've just brought it back with a more of a localization flavor into Pakistan, for example. So I think first and foremost is educate ourselves, and it's a constant education process for all of us in the industry to constantly be on top of what new innovations is coming out. I think also understanding what actual problem can this technology solve, because it has so many use cases and we still all have a duty to demystify its application and demystify how it can actually be used. So let's try and simplify what its use cases are. And then finally, I think the low-hanging fruit, from my side at least, is I think something naturally I'm going to be saying this, and Faisal knows this as well, is I think making it easier for people to get in. That's, for me, the low-hanging fruit is, what do we need to do to almost sometimes even look at the Coinbase example of how easy it is in places like the US to simply go on and purchase, let's say, Bitcoin, and then enter into the ecosystem. Because unfortunately, a whole part of the world is still shut out from a lot of complexities to actually get involved in it. So I think that's, for me, the low-hanging fruit is to myself as a company, this is what we're doing, myself and my colleagues, is how do we reduce that kind of friction or reduce that kind of difficulty to get into the ecosystem at first, and then we can start talking about all the amazing applications. But we're very excited to hopefully one day, inshallah, see the ability where people can use PKR to seamlessly and easily purchase Bitcoin or any other kind of crypto projects, even stacks, seamlessly in Pakistan.
All right, cool. Faisal, any final thoughts with respect to this audience, since they are some of the people who can do stuff? They are very probably selected people in Pakistan who are being trained by stacks. So any suggestions for them?
Yeah, so I'll go back to again the same thing, that in terms of an application or what people what people can do. To me, smart contracts are going to revolutionize the financial industry entirely, whether be it on Ethereum or Bitcoin, right? So whether you're learning Solidity and the amount of, let's go from a freelance point of view, right? Well, most people are fixated on basic level UI development and your technology stacks that are being outsourced to Pakistan. I mean, probably the most expensive component of what's about to come in the next 3 to 4 years is going to be rewriting of all these traditional financial contracts onto a smart contract, right? I mean, if money is, let's look at the rules that are coming around us, especially from a FATF perspective. The end goal is to move to a cashless system, right, or a cashless society. So in that environment, effectively, you don't have a concept of an informal black economy. So think of it from a quantum of a decade from now, that potentially Pakistan's economy, documented economy, is 300 billion. Probably another 300 to 400 billion will come online in one capacity or another. And that means a lot of that has to be written in forms of smart contracts. So to me, that smart contracts, I think, is probably, if I wasn't doing venture capital, I'd probably be setting up a shop that was doing smart contract development, getting people ready, like what Stacks is doing, because that is going to happen, right? And there's so many facets of it. There's banks that are going to do this. There's going to be escrow agents that are going to be requiring these contracts to go into place. And you're going to look at even probably family offices that are, especially, let's say, Bitcoin's demand is going to come more from a store of value. But then on top of that, what Stacks is developing in terms of some of the smart contracts that can be written, it's going to change and revolutionize how you are using that store of value in terms of money. So what I would study first, my advice would be to study some level of macroeconomics to understand what Bitcoin is. And it is the most important application. I look at Ethereum and, let's say, Cardano as more of like operating systems on which financial products are being built. So I look at them as like iOS and Android. I look at Bitcoin as digital gold. And obviously you can do a smart contract on top of Bitcoin as well. But there's so much to learn in just the current application in cryptocurrencies that I would look to solve those problems first before trying to do database. I mean, I look at ventures like startups that approach me regularly, and every now and then, they'll throw in blockchain in their pitches. But usually, to me, that's just it's a spin. It's a buzzword. There's no real application of blockchain from a pure core database point of view as of today. It's just a really, really slow database. So I'm like, just use a centralized database until you can figure out the actual value component of what you're doing using blockchain. So I guess that's my advice would be, again, just study smart contracts and study the financial system and see the changes that are happening. Some food for thought, for example, even a traditional investment bank like JP Morgan, they're both a retail and investment bank. They were using a private chain of Ethereum to settle the repo market, which is probably one of the largest financial markets. Again, it was a test run, but those are the type of changes that are happening, like how your banks are going to settle your price bonds effectively from paper onto the digital format. So look at some of those type of things, and lots of work coming ahead.
All right. So thank you very much, Sulmaan, Faisal, and Nighat for this insightful session. We touched a lot of areas in 40 minutes we had. The thing is, the key takeaways from the session, if I can just conclude, is that accountability and transparency is what we all need. Our legislators, they need to be inclusive, they need to talk to us, and we should live in a world where we can control the data we produce, where we own the data, where we are in a position to monetize that data. And for audience, they need to look around the problems, and they need to see if they can solve it with blockchain. Probably the low-hanging fruits right now are in financial sector, like Faisal said. I would suggest to start looking at these cryptocurrencies, not just from their price movements, but from their inherent structures. What problems are they solving, and why is a particular currency more popular than others? So like Faisal said, try to look at the macroeconomics, try to look at how the current system is working and what are different interventions that you can do. So, and like Sulmaan said, you have to educate yourself. Do not reinvent the wheel necessarily. Maybe a lot of things are already being solved in other parts of the world. We can just take a look. So study more. To take a look at those problems and solutions and just try to apply in your context. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time. And